Hey everybody, it's Michael. Welcome back to Let's Explore Unity. So last time we did buttons, and I still have that scene open right here. If you look, we can press play, and we can make our little cube rotate by pressing a button. So we turned a basic Unity UI button into a fancier button, and we hooked it up to some code to make it do something. So what's next on the agenda? I think it's probably, let's see about other kinds of input. In particular, I was thinking about some keyboard input. So why don't we create a new scene? I'm going to go over here, File, New Scene, and let's go ahead and save it. We will save it into directory 3 here because this is episode 3. I'm forever going to be cursed by the fact that I didn't call the intro episode 00, but we're going to have to live with it. Alright, so this is going to be 03, and let's call it input, or keyboard input, I guess. Okay, so we've got the scene saved. Well, what are we going to do? Well, kind of hard to tell what's going on over here. We're looking at the game scene, but here we've got a camera, we've got a light. Why don't we build a little bit of a world to be able to look at? So the problem with using a tool like Unity or doing any kind of programming really is that it's kind of chicken and egg. I mean, there are a lot of moving parts over here, so it's hard to get started because you're like, I want to look at this thing, but in order to look at this thing, you've got to know about 5 other things. So we're going to have to look at some other stuff as we go along here. Let's create a plane. A plane in Unity is kind of like a quad, which we already looked at, except for it has a whole bunch of subdivisions in it. We don't have to care about that right now. And notice our plane is at some random place over here. Let's reset it to put it back on the ground at 0. And let's see where our camera is looking. Alright, so our camera's kind of looking at the plane. Why don't we bring it up and forward a little bit. Oops, that's not forward. Hang on. Up. And bring it forward a little bit. Maybe just kind of get it right there. Okay, that's pretty good. And let's make this plane a bit bigger. We're going to scale it in the X and Z directions. Y is up, remember, so X and Z. We'll just make it a couple times bigger. There we go. If we actually scaled it in the Y direction, it wouldn't do anything because it's flat. So it doesn't really matter. Best to leave it at 1. And, actually, why don't we just put all of this under an empty game object that we'll call the world. There we go. So I'm going to drop the plane. Oops. Well, first of all, I'm going to make the world reset to 0. I'm not sure what the logic behind having stuff come in at different places is. I suppose if you're working over here, like, say, 1,000 units over here, and you're creating things, you kind of want them to appear in the same area and not all the way back at the origin. Maybe that's the thinking behind it. I find it tends to mostly be annoying to me, but I'm sure there's a good reason for it. So we won't second guess the Unity developers here. Okay, let's put in a few more objects. We've created a cube now. Notice that's at 0, 0, 0. That one actually did come in at the origin. Probably because the last thing we selected was at the origin. But notice it's kind of sunken into the plane. That's because a Unity cube is its pivot point is in its center, and it's 1 unit across on either side. So if we go over here and mess around with its position a little bit, you'll find that if you type in 0.5, it'll set it right on the plane. Apologies, the police are apparently apprehending somebody in my neighborhood. So I'm going to drag it over here. Let's make a few more of these cubes. How do we do that easily? Well, we could create a cube again, or we can duplicate this one. If you right click on it, there's a duplicate. You can also Control D to duplicate it, and it'll just take the name of the thing that you duplicated and put a number after it. So I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm actually going to duplicate it a few times. Let's just make just a little whatever random scene here. So there we go. There's some stuff. A little boring to look at. If we look through our window over here with the camera, it's a little boring to look at. So let's create a couple of materials here. I'm just going to create 2 materials. Duplicate that there as well with Control D, or right click. Is there not a duplicate? Yeah, there's not a duplicate on that menu for some reason, but you can Control D it. Okay, so let's call this ground. And let's call this cube. Alright, so for the cube, I don't know. maybe some kind of reddish color. Drop that onto the cubes over here. We could also do that in the inspector if we wanted to, but I don't really care. These are just to kind of give us something to look at. And so I'm clicking on the albedo, by the way, the albedo map. You can click this little circle here and it'll open up a list of bitmaps available to you, or you can drag them on, or you can click the color selector over here. And then there are lots of other things that we can modify to change how this material is going to look. And if you want to get super fancy, you can go write some shader code or something. But for now, we're just going to make very simple colors and drop them on. So now we've got a little bit, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. We've got just a little bit of a scene kind of thing going on. That's all fine. Why don't I move all of these cubes over just a little bit? I'm just shift selecting them. We're going to put them around the origin there. And then let's make a little guy. Not really a guy, but a guy. 3D object, a capsule. A capsule is kind of like a pill. It's a cylinder with a half sphere on either side. A capsule happens to be too tall, so we can move it up by 1 to TWO tall, TOO. So there's our capsule. We'll let that be our guy. A lot of times people use capsules to represent a player object that you're never going to see. Capsule makes a kind of a better object than a cube because it's rounded on bottom, and so it can kind of like take little steps when it collides with things. So sometimes people use capsules. Let's make a material for our capsule. Actually, let's just duplicate this ground material and call this player. And let's make him, I don't know, blue or something. Blue will be fine. Okay, so we have a little scene. It doesn't do anything, but we can hopefully make it do something. All right, so in order to do that, we're going to need a script. So I'm going to create a C# script over here, and I'm just going to call it, we could call it something like player, but one thing that you may want to get into at some point is having the concept of managers. A lot of people using Unity call them controllers. I kind of like the term manager. For one thing, it's shorter, and for another thing, I suppose the word are synonyms in the dictionary, but controller really sounds like something that's actively managing, actively, causing X to do Y, whereas manager sounds more to me like, yeah, I'll take a message from you, I'll pass it over to that guy, just make sure the work gets done. So I like to call things manager. I'm going to call this input manager, and I'm going to just say MGR. And actually, I'm going to create an empty over here, empty game object, and call it managers. I often will tend to do that because I can just sort of hang my script on there. Did I hang my script on there? I did not. Let's see if I can actually manage to hang my script on it. There it is. So he's over here now. All right, what are we going to do? Our manager is not at the origin. I want it to be, so I'm going to do that. And then we're going to open up MonoDevelop by clicking there. And now we have our little input manager over here. I'm going to expand the view, and for those of you screaming because I'm not using the shortcut keys, if you are, is because this is exactly the same key I pressed to record, and if I press it, I'll stop recording. I should probably rebind those. So we've got a mono behavior just like before. We also have the start and update function. We may keep these this time because they're probably going to be useful. In order to make any kind of functional demonstration here, we're going to have access to one of these objects in the environment, or the camera, or the capsule, or something that we can actually control with our keyboard input. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a member variable. Honestly, I'm not sure the terminology. I think it's going to be a member variable. Some people call things properties, some people call them fields. I'm not sure. We're going to call it a variable that belongs to this class. So it's a public because we want to be able to access it from outside of the class, and it's going to be type game object, if I can spell that right. And it's going to be the capital game object, not the little game object. Remember, the little game object, little g game object, is the component that's attached to this script, or the component that the script is attached to. We're gonna say just game object, because we're going to get an instance of a class game object. And let's call that player for now. And that's all we need to do. So you say, well, how do we get this player. I want to grab the capsule and assign it to this. How do we do that? You can do it in code, and you can also, by making it public, we can also get it over here in the inspector. So if I save this and go back over here, and we take a look at our script, now we have a thing called player, which looks like it's wanting a game object. Okay, well that's pretty cool. If we grab the capsule and drag it on here, capsule happens to be a game object. So now this thing in script, when we go looking at what is the value of player, it's going to be a reference to this game object right here. Well, that's pretty cool, because now what we can do is make this game object do things. And the place to make it do things is right here in the update function. Update is going to get called once every frame. However fast your frames are running, and it could vary considerably depending on what's going on in your game, this update function is going to get called. So if we do something here in this update function, that is going to get seen once every rendered frame in Unity. So what could we do? Well, we could do player dot, remember transform is we're grabbing the transform that's attached to the player game object, and now we could mess with it. So for instance, we could do translate, if I can find it, translate, and see what options we have there. It looks like we've got 6 options. So we could give it a vector 3. A vector 3 is simply a data type. I'm not even sure how it's represented internally in Unity, but it takes in 3 floats and specifies either a point or a direction or whatever you would want to do with a vector 3. In this case, it would represent an amount to translate in each of the directions that we're talking about. We also have one that we can specify the space it's relative to, a whole bunch of other things. But here we've got a simple one that's float X, Y, and Z. Why don't we just take that one? So we can tell it we want it to translate in a given direction. How about 0, 0, 1? And actually I'm going to make this smaller than 1, because what's going to happen is these are Unity measurement distances. So remember that capsule is too tall. If we move it 1 every frame, every rendered frame, and we're getting 60 frames a second, it's going to move 60. And in fact, this could even go faster than 60 frames a second if we weren't V-synced. I think we probably are V-synced. Hopefully I'm not getting too out there. All we're trying to do is establish control over this capsule and show that we have access to it, to do things to it. And then we're going to hook up some input to it. But unfortunately, this is a thing that we have to do in order to be able to see that. So hopefully it's not too confusing. All right, so if we press play right now, the capsule should shoot off in this direction. Let's see if that happens. All compiler errors have to be fixed. The best overloaded method for Unity Engine transform, translate, float, has some invalid arguments, really. Oh, cannot convert double expression to type float. I don't know if you guys, if you watched my last video, I didn't need to open that again. If you watch my last video, I put like an F on the rotate, like on the first 2, but not the third. I'm never really sure. I think it's treating this like a float, but because I've got a decimal in here, it wants to treat it like a double, and it wants a float. So if you put an F on the end, that should resolve that little issue. Let's see if we get an error. Yeah, we don't have an error anymore, so that's pretty cool. All right, so now maybe this thing will shoot off this direction. Let's see if that does happen. Yep, there it goes, away from us. All right, that's pretty cool. So now we have control over that guy. We can move it around. We can also rotate it and do other things with it using the various tools that the transform gives us. We can do a lot more with it too. We could change its color interactively. We could do just about anything that you can do here in the inspector to this guy in code. But for now, we just want to maybe hook up some keys and have it do some things. So let's just comment this out for a second. We don't know exactly what we're going to do. So in order to get a key in Unity, there's a thing called the input manager, I think is what they call it. If we type in input, we're going to get access to a whole bunch of different things. We got keys down, we got mouse stuff, we got lots of things. One of the things that we can grab is get key up, get key down, and get key. So let's take a look at what these guys do. This returns true while the user holds down the key. Okay? This returns true if you started pressing the key. All right? And get key up returns true when the user released the key. So this get key down and get key up are temporary things that are going to happen on the frame. Something happened. So when you press down a key on that frame, this is going to tell us that that key that we're asking about went down. If we're using get key up, it's going to tell us when that key was released during the frame. Get key is just going to get it if a key is held down. So because we probably like our player to move around sort of smoothly, why don't we try get key? And then get key is going to want something. What does get key want? It wants a string name, which is the identified name of a key. And then we've also got another variant here that I can't seem to get it to access. Oh, that's weird. Hang on. Can we? All right, well, it's not going to tell me, but the other thing that we can access, you can't click these little arrows, oddly enough. The other thing that we can access is a thing called key code. So key code is an enumeration, I believe, and key code allows us to get lots of keys, right? So if we think about this like a regular old, first-person shooter or something like that, we could use key code W to be forward. Okay, so now we're going to know if we get the key code W. This isn't doing anything for us right now, so let's wrap it in an if statement. And why don't we put this thing inside of it? Now this isn't necessarily the right way to do it. It's a way to do it. We'll talk about some different alternatives. So now if we're holding down the W key, our capsule should translate 0.1 units in the Z direction. So let's save this and go back to Unity and give it a go and see if that actually works. Did I press? I did press, but it was still compiling. There we go. Pressing the W key, it goes forward. Okay, that's pretty cool. Let's go back over here and try just copying this. And let's see if we can make it go back the other direction now. So here's S, which is generally backward. And let's put a minus here into Z. Save that, go back to Unity, let it finish compiling, and press play. Forward with the W key, backward with the S key. That is pretty neat. Now, one thing that I think I mentioned, how this update here is called kind of at a variable length of time. We're not guaranteed this is going to happen 20 frames a second or 30 frames a second or 60 frames a second or anything like that. We don't know how long it's been since the last frame. That means that if our frames are faster, then we're going to move 0.1 regardless. So we might be moving 60 times a second, 0.1 units in the Unity world. If things are bogged down, if we're doing a lot of AI or something like that, we might only be at 20 frames a second. We're still going to move 0.1. So that's going to result in some really funky movement stuff that is not going to appear to be smooth. Why don't we take care of that a little bit? Why don't we say, what is the player's speed? I'm going to make this public so that we can mess around with it in the inspector if we want to. Let me get a public float speed. Again, we're doing a lot of stuff besides keyboard input, but some of it's kind of necessary here. So instead of using 0.1f here, why don't we put in the speed? Okay, there we go. Let's save that. Now we don't initialize speed, so why don't we go ahead and do that? We could set it in the inspector, or we can initialize it up here when we declare it. Let's just do that. 1.0f, right? So we're going to say our float speed is 1 unit in Unity. Every second, though, so it's going to be pretty fast. Actually, I'm sorry. That's what we'd like it to be. We'd like it to be every second. But what we're actually doing is making it every frame. So notice that our guy is pretty quick here. And actually, I didn't do negative float. So let's make a negative there. Okay, well, how do we make it so that this guy goes 1 per second? Well, we don't really know how long the frames are yet, but there is a way to find out how long the frames are. And that is a special Unity helper that's called time capital T, time, dot delta time. If I can type it, I'll have Unity type it for me, because they're monodevelop type it for me, because I seem to be off on that. Time dot delta time. What time dot delta time is a general, there's a lot of functions under time, but one of the ones, delta time, that's the amount of time in milliseconds that's happened, or in seconds, but it's milliseconds, since the last frame. So if we multiply our 1 times that, because that is the percentage of a frame, right, of a whole second, I should say, we're going to get a speed of 1 Unity unit per second. So let's save this and try it. And you'll notice that the movement is going to be a lot slower. In fact, it's too slow, really, because it's 1 unit per second. So we can move about the length of that cube in 1 second. That's pretty slow. Let's amp it up a little bit. Let's give him a movement of, I don't know, 5. Let's see how that is. That's probably going to be pretty fast, but let's try it. Oh, no, that's not fast. Probably forgot to save it, would be my guess, because that looked about the same as before. No, that's really not doing it. What do we got going on here? Speed times time.delta time. Our speed is now a 5. Let's see. Sometimes Unity likes to remember things in the editor, and that's exactly what it did here. There's a way we can fix that so it doesn't happen, but when you expose something over here in the editor and then you mess with it in code, it doesn't always, sometimes this value sticks. So now we've got it being 5. A little trick that I forgot about, and it's good that it came up though, because you'll probably be beating your head against a wall when you realize it. There we go. Now we're a little bit faster. Okay, that's pretty cool. We could also, if we wanted to, put in some other things here. Let's grab all of this, copy it, do it again, and let's make it A, key code A, and key code D, right? So the left and right. Instead of doing this here, we're going to want to do it in the X direction. So let's put that there. Let's put in a 0 float there, and I have overwritten my little bracket there. I'm just going to copy that whole little bit, paste it there, and make speed negative. Probably don't have that right. That's probably negative. Left is probably negative. Right is probably positive. Let's see if that works. Okay, so W, S, A, no, sorry, D, and A. So now we can move our cube, our capsule, in kind of a circle here. He doesn't respect these cubes here. We could make it respect the cubes, but we're not going to bother with that at the moment. That's for another day, probably. Okay, that's pretty cool. When you hold the key down, it just goes. All right, that's neat. Unity, though, has something that's even better than this. If we go back to our code here, and I'm going to comment out all of this stuff. If you go under Edit, Format, you can toggle line comments. It's also Control-Alt-C. So now we've commented out that whole block of code there. There is another thing in Unity Input, though, which is pretty cool, and that is something called getAxis. So Unity, just like your key binding system in any game, Unity has some built-in stuff that's already sort of set up for you. And one of the nice things that it has is this getAxis, and returns the value of the virtual axis identified by axis name. Let's take a look at this thing. GetAxis, and it wants an axis name. Okay, well, what is an axis name? I think it goes in quotes because it's a string, and probably horizontal is what we want. I think that's probably right. This returns a number between 0 and or -1 and 1, I think. And the thing that's nice about the axis is that it's a proportional movement. When you first start out holding the key, the number starts out at 0 and then grows the longer you hold the key, eventually reaching full speed. So it's kind of like you've got a built-in acceleration and also deceleration. which is pretty cool. Let's see if this works as is. I may have to look that up. I'm not sure horizontal is right. It may be horiz or something. I think it's horizontal. And I gotta say, monodevelop really bugs me. I like my brackets down there. I'm sure there's a way to change that, but haven't done it. So now if we take this guy, doing horizontal, so let's grab the horizontal movement bit. Okay, we're going to paste that up there. So we're still going to translate. We're still going to do speed, and we're still going to do time.delta time. But now, oh gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. We don't need the if. We don't need the if. This is actually the value that we want right here. That's what that thing is returning. We're just going to multiply that. Should give us a number between 1 and -1 that we can then transform our guy across. So I'm not sure what I was thinking with that. Let's save it and go back to Unity. We get no errors. Let's see if this is in fact going to work. No, there's an error. Input axis horizontal is not set up. Well, that's exactly what I was thinking, and that's okay. Because now we can go and look at how to find that. And it's right here under Project Settings, under Input. So if we click on Input, we'll open up the Input Manager, and we'll be able to see all the defined axes. Okay, horizontal is capital. I wasn't sure about that. This is the name we want right here, capital horizontal. But you can also see that we have various buttons. So negative button is left, positive button is right. These are probably, I think, capturing from the joystick or input device. We also have an alternative, A and D. And then there's some other features here. Gravity of 3, dead. Does it tell us what dead is exactly? Size of the analog dead zone. All analog device values within this range map to neutral. So if your stick isn't quite centered on your gamepad, this is going to kind of tamp that out so you're not just moving when you don't have your finger on the stick. Sensitivity is 3. So we can change these things to tune it, and we can also change some other things. Notice there's a whole bunch of other things in here too. Vertical, fire, jump, mouse. For instance, if we look at jump, we probably have, a much higher sensitivity on jump. So that takes place right away rather than sort of slowly. All right, well, let's go have a look back at this guy and try making this a capital H. I might do us some good. Some of these mistakes I'm just making. Some of these mistakes I'm making on purpose to show you guys things. This mistake, I didn't actually know what it was called. So, there we go. So if you notice, I'm pushing the key down now. And notice how it takes a little while to pick up speed. Okay, let's hook it up to the vertical as well. So grab that again, and we type vertical with a capital V this time, and going to want to move this though. Copy that out of there. I'm going to put it over here, and I'm going to drop 0F. Again, this is X, Y, and Z. So the vertical is going to control our Z. Let's grab that. Input axis horizontal is not set up. I don't know why it's still saying that. I guess I don't have it clearing on play. There we go. So now we can use our keys to move around. You could hook this up to the camera or do, just about anything you wanted to do to it. And it can be any key. We can use these axes here, which is what we've done, or we could just use key presses. So for instance, we could make this jump do a thing. Can we really do a jump without getting into knowing about physics? Well, no, probably not, but we're going to maybe do that next time around. I just wanted to show you guys some real basic ways to get input from the keyboard. So check out the input item. If you go look at the Unity website document page, you're going to find out that this input can do a whole lot of things. It can get these sort of general key mapped axes and things. It can also get mouse input. It can also get your keyboard input, and it can get input directly from joysticks and joypads and probably VR controllers and touch screens and things like that. I haven't messed with those things that much, but input is basically your go-to for getting information about what the user is trying to tell your application. One thing to do, let's do a little thing here. Right now it's a little confusing because we're not moving with the camera. What would happen if we made the camera a child of our capsule? Let's check that out. Oh, there we go. So now we're following along with the capsule as we move. Now, if we wanted to, we could maybe make the mouse control where the camera is facing in regard to this capsule. So we might do that in another episode about input, or we might move on to other things and kind of pick that up naturally. One thing, well, you guys let me know what you want to see next. I'll keep working on kind of some minor things that I think we need to know about in order to move forward and do more complex applications. But if you guys have something that you go, well, I don't know what the heck you did there, bring that up, and we'll look at it in an upcoming episode. I will see you guys soon. Thanks for joining me for Let's Explore Unity.